Hi everyone, welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you for joining us at this year's LITLIT. My name is Emily Van Kennett. I'm the Public Programs Manager for the Los Angeles Review of Books. And I'm really thrilled to welcome these folks here for our fourth and final panel of the day. We've been doing this all day, and I'm just really excited to be celebrating West Coast literature with you guys, publishing and beyond. And yeah, so today's authors are all really well-versed in the world of adaptation, and I'm just excited to present them all to you. So we'll start on the end there. Jonathan Ames is the author of 12 books, including most recently A Man Named Doll and The Wheel of Doll. His third book in the Doll series, Karma Doll, comes out this January. His novels The Extra Man and You Were Never Really Here have been adapted as films, and he is the creator of 2 television series, Bored to Death and Blunt Talk. Next to him, we have Jane Hu. Jane is an assistant professor in the Department of English at the University of Southern California. Her cultural criticism, including film and TV coverage, has appeared in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The New York Review of Books, Book Forum, The Nation, Harper's, The Ringer, and The Owl, among other places. And she's just been published widely with her scholarship, and she's an assistant editor at N+1. We have Viet Thanh Nguyen, whose novel, The Sympathizer, won the Pulitzer Prize for Fiction, among other awards, and was recently turned into an HBO limited series. His other books include The Committed, the sequel to The Sympathizer, and Nothing Ever Dies, Vietnam and the Memory of War. He's written also many other things, including a wonderful children's book, and we're just so pleased to have him here. He's received fellowships from the Guggenheim and MacArthur Foundations. And then, of course, we have the lovely Anna Dorn. Anna is the author of the novels Vagabond, Exalted, and Perfume and Pain. Exalted was a finalist for the Los Angeles Times Book Prize, and her next book, American Spirits, is forthcoming from Simon & Schuster in 2026. And she has also been published in Los Angeles Review of Books. We love Anna. And I'm really excited to present our moderator today, Paul Thompson. He's the senior editor at the Los Angeles Review of Books, and he's written widely on music and film and TV. You can find his work in Pitchfork, GQ, Rolling Stone, The Ringer, and The Washington Post, among many, many others. So please, let's welcome our panelists, and let's learn about adaptation.
All right, thank everyone for being here. What Emily left out of the introduction is I moved to Los Angeles about 12 years ago because I thought, how hard could selling a TV pilot be? It's 22 minutes. What are you going to do? I do think it's a great opportunity to talk about adaptation and the different forms that prose fiction or prose nonfiction and screenwriting are, because we live in Los Angeles. And to the degree that these are interconnected mediums and interconnected industries, it's a unique ecosystem we find ourselves in. Obviously, Emily just introduced our 4 great panelists, but I want to start maybe all the way down there with Jonathan. And this seems like a very nebulous question maybe, but I'm interested in the moment you realized that the 2 forms have such radically different challenges and different capacities. When was the first time in your writing process you realized these might be entirely different beasts?
Well, let's see. Well, the thing is, maybe I didn't necessarily realize that they're different beasts, not to contradict the question, but I think
Please contradict me.
But I wasn't expecting it, doing the best I can in the moment, but I think when I write fiction, I see the scenes in my mind. Once an older writer at an artist colony said, writing is a form of seeing. So I think I see the scenes, I see a movie in my head, and then I try to put it into prose to create a dream in the reader's mind. So then, in adapting my own work for film or television, it wasn't necessarily that hard. You have to pare things down, but I still had the visual component from the scenes I'd written. But that said, prose is so different because you can, jump around in time. You have interiority. For me, it's the preferred form of writing because you can really, you're the costume designer, you're the director of photography, you're the casting agent, everything. And screenwriting is creating a sort of blueprint for the crew and the actors, and So they're very different. I think maybe I first really learned it when I sold a pilot without ever having written a script. So suddenly I had to get final drafts. So then I realized, okay, there's a big difference. And one of the things people always tell you with screenwriting is keep the prose minimal. So it's almost like police crime blotter writing. You know, you try to be very efficient because each page is like a minute. So anyway, that was a rambling answer, and so there we are.
No, and to your point about being in charge of all the different departments, there are no budget or logistical constraints when you're writing prose. You're unlimited.
Yes, and one time I wrote, it didn't get made, an animated pilot, and that was really fun because then I'm like, oh, you could have people fall off buildings and hit the sidewalk and not die. Like, you can't do that to an actor. And, but yeah, with books, I think that's why adaptation is such a good subject and why so many films and TV shows begin with books, because you create a whole world that people can grasp when they read it, and then you turn it into like a more visual medium. So.
Jane, maybe approaching it from a more critical lens, when you think about the two different forms, sort of the same question. When did you realize these are so fundamentally different?
So this is on. So I think I will also contradict the question. I don't know. I mean,
0 for 2. Okay.
You know, I was like trained in a department that didn't really see them as all that different, or rather saw film studies as growing out of literary studies, right? So a lot of the approaches as a critic that one takes to studying, analyzing, and thinking about cinema, you know, like historiographically, like comes from literary departments, right? Obviously, there's a lot of sort of distinguishing that happens afterwards, but for me, like primarily, I still think of, and I don't know, you know, from the sort of production or creation side if this is true, but I still think of reading at least sort of popular cinema narratologically. I do think that one thing that is interesting and sort of a difficulty when it comes to sort of teaching the analysis of film to students in the classroom is that they're perhaps too overly trained in reading in terms of narrative, that, you know, some of it is sort of like having them understand what exactly is intentionally happening when they're seeing a film, because a lot of it seems sort of second nature to them, right? So actually saying like the lighting here maybe is naturalistic to you at this point, but you know, there are sort of steps to this. So breaking down visual language and sort of like tiers of soundtrack, all of that stuff. I don't know, you sort of have to defamiliarize a little bit because they've become so second nature. But yeah, I think sort of overall, I like to think of them as sort of the sort of same close reading skills you take to reading a work of narrative fiction, at least. Isn't all that, again, people can disagree, isn't all that different from reading a work of narrative film or cinema, yeah.
Yeah, to your point about that forced defamiliarization, one of my early editors would always ask critics to step back and say, hold on, is this in color or not? Really think about formal aspects and everything.
Yeah, they really struggle with that. Like, I'm teaching a rom-com, like sort of a classic Hollywood rom-com class right now, and for the first half of the semester, we do basically black and white, and it takes them about like 6 films to not hate it. You know, they're sort of like, I kind of like black and white, and there's actually less to focus on, or, you know, so I don't know. It's a being in the classroom kind of reminds me about all of these sort of differences as well. Yeah.
Now, Viet, as I've been saying, these forms are so similar, and so, as someone who recently saw his work on screen, how would you say the forms have different capacities to bring out different aspects of a story you're familiar with?
I mean, sometimes they really converge. So if you've seen The Queen's Gambit, for example, I like that TV series so much I went and read the novel by William Tevis, and I realized it's completely adaptable to TV. I mean, it's almost written like a screenplay in and of itself. I happen to have written a novel that falls under the genre of novels that are impossible to adapt to the screen, or so I've been told. And so when you get to that point, then I think for me there is a huge difference because film and TV are inherently collaborative mediums. That's so radically different than what is required of most writers, I think. And so I like to talk about the fact that when poets write, the only thing that it costs a poet is their life, and no one cares about the lives of poets. But when you make a TV show or film, it costs tens of millions of dollars, and then all of a sudden everybody cares. You have all this money invested in it. And the fact is that I never wanted to write a screenplay because I knew that after writing the screenplay, everybody else would meddle with it. And that's exactly the experience in the Sympathizer TV series. We had a writer's room, we had scripts and so on, and I read the scripts and I said, that looks good or that doesn't look good, whatever. Changes were made. Then they go and they make the thing, and even as they're making it, they're changing it as they're shooting it. So whatever script you have as you start off isn't even necessarily what's going to get shot. And then what actually gets onto the screen at the end may have no, in certain key parts, no relationship to what I actually read. So there was all of this knowledge on my part that I would have to trust the collaborative process, which, if you look at the history of Hollywood, is not a good bet from the perspective of writers. Okay, but I actually happened to get fairly lucky that we assembled collaborators who actually shared the vision of the novel, or at least said so to my face. And judging from the output, what was done at the end, I think that was actually fairly accurate. And I remember our basically the auteur of the series, Park Chan-wook, when we premiered the episode, the debut, he said, he apologized to me semi-facetiously about the changes that he had to make in the adaptation. But he said, hopefully you realize that there are things you can do with the visual medium that you can't do with the literary medium. And I think he's absolutely right. In my case, the novel was supposedly impossible to adapt because it's just a confession. It's an interior monologue, and it's voice-driven, and it's driven by the vocabulary. So for Park Chan-wook, the reason why I wanted him so badly and why it seemed like such a perfect match was because his work had influenced me. If you've seen Old Boy, for example, that was a major stylistic influence on the Sympathizer. And the reason why is because he could achieve visually what I was trying to achieve narratively. Like through his using the visual palette, color, shot, what he could do with the actors and the music, and all of these different visual and sound elements, that is what he could do with the collaborative aspect that would try to translate what I was doing on the written page.
The Lives of Poets, Anna Dorn. So you're someone who is now facing the prospect of your work being adapted for the screen. Obviously, it is a collaborative process, and one that you might not know what it looks like until the final edit comes out. Do you feel nervousness, preciousness about your story going through that kind of process?
Nervousness, yes. Preciousness, no. I don't really feel precious about how my work is adapted because, not to be cynical, but ultimately I just want money. Sorry, somebody had to say it. That's the difference, is that TV adaptations, there's a lot more money involved, and you get health insurance, and you get in the Writers Guild, and those are the things I'm thinking. Maybe I'm precious about those things, like getting health insurance. But no, I don't care if the adaptation's horrible. Honestly, that really doesn't matter to me. But I do love film and TV. I'm not going to say that I don't, and I have had periods in my life where I wanted to be a screenwriter, mostly because I didn't honestly really read books as a kid. I found it really hard and boring, and I watched a lot of television, and I like writing dialogue, so I was like, screenplays kind of made more sense to me. But then as I tried to write them, I realized I really had zero knack for plot, and I think I've learned it a little bit better, but at that time I really had zero knack for plot, and that's a difference. I mean, screenplays are very plot driven. Some could say formulaic. I told myself I was not going to be cynical or shady, but formulaic is a word that comes to mind when you're thinking about the difference between screenplays and books. And I relate to a lot of what's been said. I mean, I think a big reason I think I was drawn to writing novels is because I love being alone and not having to work with anybody. And in a writer's room, there's a lot of cooks in the kitchen, and there are a lot of people that you're getting notes from whose opinions you don't necessarily respect. And that, I find
like being diplomatic in those situations to be, as you might imagine, to be incredibly challenging. But also, I think there's a lot of opportunity to learn. I mean, I see, like, I haven't been in a writer's room, but I have had 2 books optioned, one of which I went through the pitching process, like writing the pitch, pitching it. So I have some sense. And I learned a lot. I learned a lot about plotting and structure and format, and making ideas more profitable, which is something I'm obviously always interested in, because I'm a vicious capitalist. No, I'm not. I mean, maybe I am. But I forgot where I was going with that.
Well, no, you brought your trademark optimism to the process, but I'm curious, especially Viet and Jonathan, I think that everyone here probably can imagine what the drawbacks or anxieties attendant to collaboration after years of solitary work can bring. What are the positives? What did you like about being in rooms, about seeing your work go through a room? What does it bring that you might not have expected in a positive way, if anything? Please contradict me again.
Well, for me, sort of speaking to what Anna was talking about, I think I got a TV show, or I wrote a pilot. Well, I wrote a short story called Bored to Death, and then that became my TV show, Bored to Death, and I managed to become the showrunner. But I had been broke, I was like 45 years old, and I had been a broke novelist for 20 years, living hand to mouth in my own, that famous Knut Hamsun way, that book Hunger. And so this was a whole new experience, and there was tremendous pleasure, like a big set. Oh, I loved all the free food, or like there was like a truck with like a spigot of coffee on the side. Like all this was like, thrilling to me. And then, and speaking about adaptation, like screenplays do have to be really efficient, fast. Like I learned a lot of tricks with screenplays. Like you shouldn't have a scene be longer than 2 pages. Like if it's once it gets 2 pages, it starts dragging, it ends up getting cut, certainly in comedy. Or if you go longer than 2 pages, you need a couple of entrances and exits and other people to come in and really switch it up. But it was a lot of fun to try to write fast dialogue, see that come to life. On the set of the pilot, I had written Rain because it was noir, and there was a lot of talk like that this rain machine was costing $40,000 and it wasn't working and it was getting really late, and I thought, I knew to myself, it really didn't need to be rain, but because I had put it in there, and because it could have just been dark and shadowy with some, but I had written in rain, I didn't fully realize the extent of it. But the more I wrote for TV, the more I began to have fun with doing visual things, like calling up images from silent films and stuff like that. And one other interesting experience for me was one of my novels became a movie, and there had been some autobiographical elements. And as a young man, I had escorted a wealthy older lady to a dinner at the Russian Tea Room. I was what's known as a walker, an extra man. I substituted for my roommate, who was like a professional walker, in that he escorted older ladies, not for payment, but you would get a free meal. It was like a perfect thing for being like a broke eccentric. And when
go on.
And so anyway, he had sciatica one night, and he didn't want one of the other older men of the coterie to be called in, so he sent me at the last moment to take this woman in her 90s to a Broadway show, and then dinner at the Russian Tea Room. And it was kind of an amazing evening. I ended up having to carry her up to bed. She drank so much and all that. And I don't know, 12 or 14 years later, they made the movie, and there I was, an extra, in the same very Russian tea room, watching Paul Dano speak to a famous, I'm blanking on her name, I apologize, actress, recreating this moment, and they got the very play. So that was a very interesting, doubling of life, or art imitating life, and many layers. So there was been tremendous pleasures with the adaptation process, and then also a lot of stress, and then collaboration can be difficult, and it can be heartbreaking when maybe something that was precious to you, it is in a different form, hasn't worked out as well. But also, the relentless note process, it can be soul crushing at times. But I mean, in a kind of having caviar caught between your teeth sort of way, that kind of soul crushing, it's still, there's a luxury soul crushing.
So I'm an executive producer on the TV series, which means apparently nothing. Beforehand, I was promised you have creative control, and then I said to my agent, "Do I really have creative control?" He said, "No, they just say that. They just say that to you to get you to sign the contract." But and again, I mostly am a writer because I like sitting in a room by myself. So it was really an arduous process in a lot of ways because you had to be an extrovert. I had to be an extrovert in the making of this because the hardest part for me was spending 4 or 5 years having meetings with people and doing a lot of talking. Apparently, making movies or TV shows involves a lot of talking.
A lot of lunch.
Yeah, a lot of lunch. Well, we didn't even get lunch, so we just had a lot of talking. But once we got to the moment where we got the money and we started to shoot, or even a little bit before that, the collaborative part was actually really, really interesting for me. I'll never forget the moment I met Sandra Oh for the first time because she's in the TV series, and she turned to me and she said, "So what's your process?" And I'm like, wow, I have no idea. No one's ever asked me that question before because no one cares about a writer's process. And then, meeting Park Chan-wook, he came to my house, and this man had clearly read the novel. I mean, it was really interesting because he's a director and so on, but he's also a writer, and so he had all these great questions about.
He was a critic initially, right?
Yeah, he's a critic. He's a scholar as well. And so after getting all his questions and suggestions, I thought, where were you when I was writing the book? It could have been a better book. And there were certain things that he did in the making of the movie that tightened things up, which I thought were really interesting. That maybe I should have done that myself. So it was interesting to watching all these really talented people in their own disciplines do things that I could never do. Just getting an appreciation for costumes, for example, or the kind of stuff that went into the special effects and things like that. And realizing as I was watching this TV series being made over at least, it took at least a year, to realize that there is a parallel to the writing as a drafting process. Because most of you read a book, you see the finished product, and all of us who are writers know that was 1,000 layers of stuff that we had to scrape away and redo and all that. And so to watch a TV series getting made is to realize, the script is just the basis, and then you layer all this other stuff on top. And that is really interesting to watch and also really boring. So, like, I did a cameo. If you watch the show, I'm there on screen for about a second and a half, and I spent 2 days on that, So it's incredibly boring to watch this stuff getting made, and I get a greater appreciation for how much control the artistic people have to tolerate the drudgery and the boredom in order to arrive at what you get to watch at the end, which is a really spectacular product. You get to watch 7 hours, and that took them like a year. And it's not a complaint. Like, it took me 2 years to write The Sympathizer, and you can probably read it in a year, if you ever read it at all. Now there's a TV series, you never have to read the novel, but just appreciating the degree to which, like, any artistic process involves that kind of discipline. Is just manifested among a collective and a collaborative group of people versus a single individual.
Now, Jane, earlier you were talking about your students and recognizing the formal aspects of a work, but I'm curious, when you're having young people right now read film, television might be inherently different, but do they tend to see it as the work of a single auteur, or is there a sense of it as a coalition of different departments?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure, like, intuitively, if not that, it's almost like, so when I teach the rom-com class, I teach some of the Stanley Cavell work on sort of the comedy of remarriage. He's a literary scholar, or he's a philosopher, really, but he has these great readings of film, and it's sort of, they seem obvious now, but, when he was writing and he was sort of, he's sort of like negging the reader. He's like, or trolling, I don't know, like, it's so crazy to think of, like, philosophy and the romantic comedy as, like, sort of the same thing. But the thing that he gets at that in teaching students is sort of remarkable to realize was actually quite new when he was, writing the book a few decades ago, is that these are actors who have, like, personas, but they're playing a role, and they're playing a role once, and you can rewatch it. I mean, it's about remarriage, but it's also about sort of the critic rewatching something over and over and learning something different, and that's sort of the philosophical bent of the argument. And he sort of juxtaposes that to, well, when you watch a theater play, that's actually an adaptation, let's say, that happens every night, right? You can do that over and over, and each time it's different. A film is a performance that's sort of like hardened in time, right? It's live, it's an interpretation of the screenplay or the script, but that's that actor sort of like memorialized in cellulite or whatever. So I think that's, I mean, I guess that's a long-winded way of saying that the students actually seem to be more intuitively aware that it's the actor. You know, they're sort of more attached to the actor's persona than the idea that there is an auteur or that there's this whole crew, and that like the lighting is different from the person who's adapting the screenplay, is different from the person who is picking out the costumes, right? They seem very sort of actor-driven, and that is probably for a whole host of reasons. But
do you think that makes them enter or approach stories from more of a character basis than they might reading literature?
Yeah. Well, actually, I mean, when I have, Viet probably gets this too, when I have students reading literature, they also have a kind of like identification or a relationship through identification or disidentification. So they have that too with films. But yeah, it seems much more character-based, which obviously ends up being about plot, but it seems more about like, does this character make sense? Are they behaving in a way that is consistent, is relatable, is problematic? Like, that seems to be the driving factor. So if anything, if historically it's been, I mean, they probably do think, yeah, one guy, a director, is making this, if I had to press them on that, but that seems almost to override it, partially maybe because they like have no idea who Howard Hawks is, right? So
when we're talking about adaptation, it's usually not bidirectional. No one is having panels about the novelizations of movies for the most part. But Anna, you didn't grow up here, but I think of you as a very LA writer, and the entertainment industry actually figures largely in some of your fiction. What is the appeal to you of both the actual like on-screen product of movies and television, but also the milieu around it as something that's fodder for prose fiction?
Well, yeah, it's funny you say that because it's pretty awkward being in the sort of like adaptation talks about my book, Perfume and Pain, because a lot of it is sort of inspired by the process of another book I had being optioned and how sort of excruciating I found those meetings and like how bad I was at them, and then I have to show up with these new meetings, and I guess we don't really address the elephant in the room, which is that like I kind of like despise Hollywood a little bit, but I actually do love TV and film. I guess I have a love-hate relationship with it. There are a lot of TVs and films that like really inspire me and that blow my mind, and I kind of worship them, but I feel like, I mean, this is not news, but a lot of, what's made is not great or inspiring. But there are people who really, think that it is. And one thing that I struggle with the most with like the Hollywood world is like, I feel like a few people have spoken to it, but like the language, I think it works really well in a book. Like my books are a little bit satirical. It's pretty easy to satirize. Like they love to like tell you that they love you, you're a genius, they're obsessed with you, but they've never read your book, and it's so obvious. And I don't care. You don't need to read my book, but don't pretend that you have. That's what kind of bothers me, and it's awkward. I don't know how to handle it because they say something that like directly shows that they have not read the book, and I'm just kind of like, yeah, what's it like to be such a huge fan of mine? And then you'll like do a pitch and like the whole room is like, oh my God, we're dying. This is the best thing we've ever heard. We're like fainting. We're on the ground. And then they like pass on it like 5 seconds after. So it's like, I find that very unnerving, but it's also, and there's a lot of talk of like avails. Like, what are your send me your list of avails. Just availabilities, but they say avails. They also, when they call somebody, they call it trading. I'm trading with. I don't know if you you all have heard this. I didn't know what it meant for a really long time. I was scared to ask. I was like, what are they trading? Like, is it bartering? But no, it just means that they're playing phone tag. Like, they called someone, the person hasn't called them back, they call it trading. I don't know. There's all these strange terms, there's very strange language, but I find it just like ripe for satire. I think it's so funny, and like part of the reason, honestly, I want to be in a writer's room is so I can freaking write about it in a novel. That's the main reason, and the money, but both. Did I answer your question?
Always. Now, it's funny, I remember reading reviews of The Sympathizer that explicitly said unfilmable, unadaptable, as value neutral or a compliment, right? It's taking unique advantage of the form. I'm curious to start with you, but I want to know from all four of you, has your idea, as we go through these different phases of television and film, about what stories are ripe for adaptation, has that widened? Has it not? What do you think makes something uniquely unadaptable? Do you think that they were right about The Sympathizer initially? Were you surprised when people wanted to turn it into TV?
So I mean, that question is usually asked in terms of like formal aspects of the novel or the book or whatever. You know, something is too complicated to adapt, and I think there's obviously truth to that. It will probably be really difficult to try to adapt Finnegan's Wake, for example. But there's another.
Do you want to read my spec, actually?
Okay, that'd be awesome. Yeah. The most amazing thing ever. Okay. But there's another layer of unadaptability, which is the fact that certain kinds of stories just are not seen as adaptable. And so, yeah, I mean, people were saying that about The Sympathizer in terms of the fact that of its voice and its literary complexity, but also I think, honestly, at the basis, it's a Vietnamese story, you know, and what can you say? I mean, Hollywood is generally not at the avant-garde of political complexity. So go back to the example of the Vietnam War. I mean, the first American artists who responded to the Vietnam War were the poets. The last American artists to respond were the Hollywood people. And that's because, you know, you're basically in charge of an aircraft carrier, and it's really hard to turn an aircraft carrier. The cost of our TV series, for example, was about the cost of an F-35 stealth fighter jet, okay? Just to put it in terms that you would understand. Because The Sympathizer is a critique in one dimension of the American military-industrial complex. People in the military-industrial complex generally don't want to be critiqued. And people in Hollywood, I call Hollywood the unofficial ministry of propaganda for the military-industrial complex.
Sometimes officially.
Officially, yes. And so and on top of that, again, it's about Vietnamese stories. And as you can imagine, telling stories about certain populations in this country has been extremely difficult for a very long time. And now we've reached the point maybe with Asian Americans where we said, oh my God, we've had beef, and we have an interior Chinatown. We'll throw Shogun in there too. They're not quite Asian American, close enough, you know. We have all this Asian American representation. But, you know, honestly, that's a really recent phenomenon. And, you know, it took like, I don't know, 5 or 6 years from The Sympathizer winning the Pulitzer Prize to getting the green light. And yeah, I think it was partly because what are we going to do with a story about Vietnamese people speaking Vietnamese? I mean, that is like even more perplexing than avant-garde aesthetics, or maybe just as perplexing. And so there's so many things that have to happen in order for that to take place. The novel had to win a Pulitzer Prize. That's all you got to do, win a Pulitzer Prize, and all of a sudden your literary novel might be ripe for adaptation. And then
5 years later.
Yeah, 5 years later. But then also, I mean, honestly, like I really do think that COVID, the so-called China virus, the rise of anti-Asian violence, the murder of 6 Asian women in Atlanta, made people realize maybe we're not as multicultural of a country or as a film industry that we would like to imagine. You know, maybe we actually have deep-seated racist problems against Asians in this country. So I really do think that shock of COVID and people witnessing anti-Asian violence unfolding in real time helped to create this opening for us to do The Sympathizer. And I'm just using this as an example of how difficult it is, as you're implying, to get certain works made, and it's sort of a miracle that this series got made. And for the very same reason, we probably will not have a sequel to The Sympathizer TV series.
Now, Jonathan, from being in both industries for quite a while, is your sense that both in the formal sense and in the topical sense, as he's saying, is that expanding? What is adaptable now, or do you not think it is?
I don't think I can speak to the larger issues, but what I can speak to in terms of what might work well adaptation-wise within my own experience. So, like, I think, and this was like 30 years ago, Francis Ford Coppola was starting a literary magazine called Zoetrope, and his pitch, and I was a bunch of writers in a cafe, was the short story often makes for the best film. Like Rear Window was based on a short story. So I'm going to have a literary magazine that you publish your short stories in, and I'm going to have the film rights. That was his thing, because he felt that the short story, and I always tell my friends, like, don't write a spec screenplay. Write a long short story. Write a novella, because people will read them, because, you know, we're making fun of the Hollywood people, but they're really good readers, a lot of them, and very bright, and they love novels or long short stories, and I feel like you can really realize your vision if you like to write prose, because also people bring so much bias to screenplays, and so then at least you get to share your art or your notion or whatever you're needing to express with other human beings if you write it in prose first. And what I have found works well in terms of adaptation, I think a lot of times that's why novels fall short as films, because they're so long, and a screenplay's got to be at most 115, 120 pages. It's got to move quickly. So I wrote my novella, this novella, You Were Never Really Here, and the director, and I love her, she basically took my novella and transferred it into final draft. And it worked really well, and then she began to change it, and she did beautiful work with it. So I'm like, and part of what I realized that novella and then my subsequent novels is I write within a tight time frame. The story will take place over 2 or 3 days, so that, like, a movie is often propulsive, but I'm also trying to write genre stuff now. I love mysteries, pulp fiction, so this is the kind of stuff I'm writing. So I think in terms of adaptation, like for a movie, a long short story or novella, that could work well as a film and stay true to the story. And what's great about what's happened in TV, though, is you could take a novel, a 400-page novel or 500-page novel, and do 8 episodes. Then you could really do it justice, and you're not having to cut out all this stuff, and so you could really, like, you know, honor the novel in a good way. So I think that's what's exciting with what's happened in TV, is that you can take novels and do 2 seasons or 8 or miniseries, and then for the shorter stories, film is still a great way to translate it.
Jane, what about you? How have you seen Hollywood's approach to adaptation evolve or not evolve, as the case may be?
I feel like I probably don't know anything that, you know, a lot of people in this room do. Like, there's there's the rise of IP-based, right, film production, sort of like commodity, brand-oriented adaptations where you're sort of generating narrative and plot around like objects or scenes, like polypocket spaces or whatever. Something that is interesting around the IP stuff, I don't know if anyone read, like, there's the Vulture profile of Ben Mesrich, who wrote the novel or the book that like The Social Network was based on, right? And in his case, what I found interesting about his trajectory is that he is the temporality of what seems like ripe, right? It's kind of like the inverse or the opposite end of sort of the difficulties of adaptation that Viet was talking about. So he will like grab stories now from headlines and then write like a 10 to 14 page proposal and take it to Hollywood first. And then once Hollywood buys it, then will he commit to writing like the book version, right? So then the temporality of book to film adaptation is much tighter than...
Or sometimes even simultaneous.
Right, yeah. So that, I mean, that was interesting. They were even saying that like he's post-IP because it's actually his name tagged to the story that generates like the value, right? There's something kind of like, I don't know, like mimetic about the value added there. But yeah, I don't know, maybe like that was interesting in terms of thinking about like the rise of nonfiction in contrast to novels, right? As driving, like based on a true story, seems to be, you know, compelling. That started making me think about like the biopic. I feel like one of the cliches, again, I'm just going to talk about critical cliches. One of the cliches about The difficulties of adaptation is that Hollywood loves stories of like geniuses, right? But that's actually like thinking is famously hard. Or working is famously hard. Like hence like why The Social Network is such an interesting adaptation. So I mean that's another version of thinking about the other critical commonplace, which is that novelistic interiority, free and direct discourse. All of those things are really hard to represent. Short of like doing a lot of voiceover. So it just sort of made me think about sort of which genres, not just sort of IP-based genres or templates, but sort of which the sort of difference between fiction and nonfiction as more saleable, I guess. Yeah.
And that saleability of nonfiction definitely informs the magazine world. There have been 2 projects I can think of in Los Angeles that cropped up that were pretty open about their intention to commission and publish stories with the explicit goal of them being optioned. Now, treating this as a cone of silence, I know we're not supposed to say these things out loud. Do any of you feel pressure to write things that are adaptable by someone other than yourself when you're writing prose fiction now?
I think about it for sure, because I'm the capitalist. That's a joke. That's a joke. But I definitely I've started thinking about it more, just because I'm aware of like that's sort of how you make writing novels like doable as a career. But also I think, like, I guess before when I said like I'm not precious about the adaptation, I think just having an adaptation period is really good for your career as a novelist, because it means the book will sell more, the publishers will invest more in you, like foreign publishers will be more interested. So it is this whole ecosystem, but I also kind of think the books, at least in terms of the types of books that I'd like to write, which are, I'm here to entertain. Like, I'm not here to do anything much beyond that, as you guys can tell. I think a book that's adaptable is like the type of book that I want to write. Like, if it works on a screen and if it works for TV, that's great. Like, that's what I'm trying to do. And for me, that's a lot of that is just making the plotting stronger, making it more dramatic, making it more action, less thinking. I mean, I think a lot of my books are just a girl thinking, but which I also like. So I definitely do think about it, and not in a cynical way, like in a fun way, I think.
No one has pressured me to write anything adaptable, and I don't need to do that either. But my film and TV agent is doing his job, which is to try to bring me opportunities to like write movies or screenplays. And my feeling on all of this is that it's a test. It's a test. Like writing a novel is a test. It's a test you have to face every day. But writing, Jonathan knows much more about this than I do. But for me, the idea of like writing a screenplay or TV series is a test too. The test of working with a collaborative process. The test of trying to work with a studio or producers. I'm not sure I'm up for the test. So I just want to do it once to see how disastrous it is or isn't. So it's not really about adaptability
like
in that
skydiving,
sense.
yeah.
It's about adapting to a totally different industry and a different way of making art that I'm not used to.
I mean, I think somewhat addressing the question, like the last 4 books that I've written, I've over the years got very addicted to the page turner. I love the experience as a reader where I have to stay up till 2 o'clock in the morning and I'm turning the page, and so those are the kind of books that I've been wanting to write. And then when I hit 200 pages, I'm like, that's enough. It'll be enough for a book. Like, and because my second book that I spent like 5 years writing was like 400 pages, and and it took so long. But anyway, I do think, so when I write these shorter, faster novels, I'm aware that they could make really good films. But to get anything filmed or made is climbing such a mountain. I mean, 5 years is actually pretty fast, like in terms of Hollywood time, because it's like you just have to persevere. And I mean, like even like great filmmakers like Guillermo del Toro, like I saw something like he listed something like 30 projects that he invested a lot of time or care in that never got made. It's like, it's really, it's a miracle that does get filmed because of the amount of money, bringing all the people together and all that. Like, I called it like a Swiss clock of luck. Like, it's like, everything has to precisely happen just right, but then there's an element of luck or timing, or the right people get interested. And but I think for all of us here who love books or love to write, the real joy is, for me as a writer, is to be alone at the desk. Like, the world goes away. It's a form of meditation. I guess it gives me meaning to like play with sentences, and all that other stuff is sometimes about a way to pay the rent or a new adventure or a test, or but again, I just really enjoy, especially as I've gotten older, just like playing with sentences. Like that makes me happy.
Now, Emily's making threatening gestures at me, but before we do get out of here, we've talked just recently here about a lot of the industry stuff around this, but I'm curious from each of you, I'm going to put you on the spot. I'd love to hear a work of adaptation that you love, and if you have one, something you've always wanted to see. Finnegan's Wake, limited series coming soon, but yeah,
Okay.
let me hear.
Carol, which is an adaptation of The Price of Salt by Patricia Highsmith, which she wrote under a pen name in like the 50s or 60s. I love the book. I love the movie. That's so rare to love both. I think it's such a beautiful adaptation that is very faithful to the book, but also like makes it very stylish in a way that the book can't be because it's visual. So yeah, I would say Carol is probably my favorite adaptation. I also love Bored to Death. I'm not just sucking up, but I do love it.
I was going to have a no bored to death rule,
oh, okay.
but yeah.
Well, never mind. In terms of something I want, I'm desperate for A Secret History by Donna Tartt. I actually was recently researching it because I was like, why hasn't this been adapted? It's so perfect. It's like this amazing friend group. It's dark academia. People love that. There's a murder. People love that. People love Donna. But yeah, apparently like a bunch of weird stuff. I was in development for a while. A bunch of weird stuff happened. I think somebody died, and now she has the rights again. So I don't know. Praying for that.
I've watched 3 out of 4 seasons of My Brilliant Friend. I think it's actually a pretty good adaptation of the novels, which is pretty amazing. So I'm looking forward to the fourth season rather. I also want to mention I watched Park Chan-wook's The Handmaiden, which I thought was a brilliant movie and a great adaptation of a novel I did not read. So that's an interesting question, right? Like you love the adaptation, but if you haven't read the book yet, how can you be sure how good of an adaptation it is? And if he took a 19th century Victorian novel and he turned it into a mid-century Korean decolonizing drama. So I mean, it's a radical act of adaptation. So that's the next thing. I got to read the novel. Fingersmith. 21st century. God, good. My colleague, the scholar. No, I don't know what I'm talking about.
But you're a big fan.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. That's a sin to commit. I mean, to acknowledge, right? And then forget the book that I would like to see. Carlos Bulosan's America's in the Heart. I mean, I wrote a whole dissertation chapter on America's in the Heart, and Carlos Bulosan was this celebrated Filipino immigrant Marxist writer. And America's in the Heart is his sort of Depression-era account of racism and the labor struggle and Marxist revolution in the United States in the context of patriotism. It's such an incredible story. It would make a great TV series, I think. So if there's anybody out there who is interested, it's one of the classics of Asian American literature.
I also love Handmaiden, and I like that it's not my answer, but I just piggying back, I like it because it's one of those adaptations where it's great because it's different from, like I think great adaptations don't have to be faithful, right, to the text. So I also love Carol. Anyway, so I love. I was going to say like The Age of Innocence, but then I actually think that one adaptation that is amazing, if you haven't seen it, is Robert Wise's film adaptation of Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House. It's called The Haunting, and one of the really I mean, it's amazing at every level. But one of the funny things that happened was that when they were writing the screenplay, I mean, it's about a haunted house, right? They wanted to portray sort of the protagonist's dissolution in terms of sort of mental breakdown. So they had this like whole, retrofitting of this woman going crazy in a house in a big mansion, and they went to Vermont and they like met with Shirley Jackson. She was like, no, like this is a great idea, but the ghosts are real. Like it's not a literary device, it's not a metaphor. So they kind of went somewhere in between. And I just think that's kind of remarkable. I think the Gothic in general adapts really well. And there are lots of things that I want to see adapted, including The Secret History, but something that I think would be a fun experiment, I mean, it's been done before, but I think it hasn't been done very well, is Henry James's The Golden Bowl, because it's really, really long, but if you break it down in terms of actual scenes, it's like 11 or something. Like, there's only like sort of 11 different settings, so I think that it actually like is one of these things that sort of upsets the idea that sort of long novels or Jamesian sort of interiority can't be adapted. I'd like to see it done well.
Well, before coming here, I thought, I better Google like the greatest adaptations of all, and it really hits you just how many of the films that we have loved did come from books. Like Shawshank Redemption, I guess that was like a long short story, and there was a time in my life, I guess pre-streaming, where I loved to channel surf, and I had this weird kismet where every time I channel surf, I would hit Shawshank Redemption like right around the same point, like every time, and then I would watch it. I must have watched it like 30 times, and
Kismet's a funny word for TNT's marketing strategy, but yeah.
Yeah, that could be a channel, Kismet. But anyway, there's so many, and then somewhat related to the question, I guess, like recently, I watched Slow Horses, and then I saw it was based on a book, and then I read like 8 of those books. They're wonderful prose, and interesting story about the novelist himself, because like he almost lost his publisher halfway through the series, and then eventually it did become this TV series. Now everyone's reading these books, and then Game of Thrones, I remember watching the first season, and I'm like, I wanted more, and then I read the books, and those of you who have read the books, like I love them even more than the series. Like, and also George R. Martin, like the prose was great, and the characters he created, like, and so it can go both ways. Where like the film media sent me back to the books, and I think because I'm a book lover first and foremost, I end up loving the books more. In terms of something that's never been made, I'm not sure that well, during COVID, I started rereading the books of my childhood. Like I reread the Foundation series, and I thought, this could be a really great TV show. And then I Googled just to see and then sure enough, they made it, and I think it's brilliant visually. And then I reread Tarzan, which I had loved as a boy, and I don't think there's ever really been a great Tarzan. Like, and it's a pretty fun story. Anyway. So, okay, so there we are.
I was told before we go we have time for exactly one question. Now, I need each of you to look deep within yourselves and say, am I that person? Who wants to step up? Is there one of you? Yes. Oh, I didn't mean literally step up, but you can if you want.
I looked deep in myself when I saw that I'm a good drawer.
That's a great question.
Thank you to our wonderful panelists. And, yeah.